Get ready to rumble. Schilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. I've become sick and tired of the false narratives and the fake news. I would imagine you're in the same boat. We've been subjected to it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on and on, over and over and over again, not only by the mainstream media, but by our schools, by our businesses and establishments, and all of them putting forward these false narratives and fake news. And we're told we have no choice but to believe it, and we dare not speak out against it. President Trump coined the term fake news. And I think a lot of people, when he said this, did not really understand what he was talking about because, well, who thought anything was fake about the news? Maybe some of us suspected, but this was not a broadly held concept. Others understood what he was talking about, but they refused to believe that there was a conspiracy amongst news organizations, the Democrat Party, big business, and the globalists to put forward things that were not true as a disinformation campaign to disrupt American society. But it has come to pass. President Trump has been proven right, and it should be obvious to anybody who looks that this is what's going on. I've been putting all of this material aside that I'm going to present to you today, setting it aside for a time when I could put it together for you in an easily digestible format. I want to go to the very first example that I've put forth, and this is the Capitol Riot that took place on January the 6th of 2021. And on January 15th, as I was sitting at the radio station, I was hearing over and over and over again on CBS News, the national news coming through the radio at the top and bottom of every hour, about some new revelation that had taken place in Washington, D.C. following the Capitol riot, that there was an intent to kidnap and assassinate high-level officials, including Vice President Mike Pence. Now, this didn't just stop with the radio, and I was absolutely astounded on that evening as I turned on the CBS Evening News, something I very rarely ever do, and heard Norah O'Donnell, the CBS Evening News anchor, telling the entire world, because this is a world-watched broadcast, the following about what they now know about what took place on the 6th of January at the Capitol.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us on this Friday night. We are going to begin with some breaking news because federal prosecutors now say that some of those rioters who stormed the U.S. Capitol last Wednesday intended to capture and assassinate government officials, including Vice President Mike Pence. And tonight, we're learning chilling new details about just how close they were to their target. CBS News has confirmed that Secret Service agents whisked Mr. Pence into an office off of the Senate floor, just 1 minute before rioters stormed up a nearby stairwell in what some are calling a stunning breach of Secret Service protection. Now, as we come on the air, the nationwide manhunt to arrest and detain some of the most violent rioters is expanding, as concern grows that some of them may now be planning more attacks during next week's inauguration.
Okay, so that's all full of fake news, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. But in looking at the visual here, and I captured this and saved it for posterity, this lady is practically drooling over herself. She's obviously a hater of the president and the supporters of the president, and she was so happy and giddy to report this information, which later turned out to be false. I must credit ABC News because ABC did not make such a big deal about this. NBC News had it in the top of the newscast, but it was not featured like Norah O'Donnell did on CBS Evening News. Now, when I say this is fake, let me tell you what happened a week later. And this was published online, but I don't believe I saw this anywhere in the television news. I certainly didn't hear it on CBS News. But here's what we have. Michael Sherwin, acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, said Friday there was, quote, no direct evidence to suggest rioters planned to capture or assassinate lawmakers during last week's deadly siege of the U.S. Capitol. But yes, you just heard CBS News and Norah O'Donnell say that they have discovered there was a plan, and I'm looking at the graphic right now, quote unquote, capture and assassinate Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States. And that was reported broadly, and it was not taken back, even though the evidence that was presented later shows the reason that came forward was a rogue U.S. attorney wanted to keep somebody from being released, and so essentially put together a story that couldn't be substantiated. Nowhere to be found and not reported in the mainstream media, although if you went online in the days following, you could see some of these stories. I guess the print media or the online media was trying to protect their reputation because this is just totally outrageous. Here's another one. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, this coming out of USA Today, a report on January the 8th, and we mourn the death of this Capitol Police officer. The story said that Sicknick was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher, according to two law enforcement officials who spoke to the Associated Press. So USA Today citing Associated Press and law enforcement officials. This sounds very credible, and this was reported widely. Now, I did see a video of somebody throwing a fire extinguisher and hitting a riot cop in the head, apparently. This was coming from the Capitol. It appeared outside the Capitol. But as it came out later, that may not have been Brian Sicknick. This is coming now from Fox News on February 6th after the January 8th report, and I believe the widely accepted premise that Officer Brian Sicknick was killed after being hit on the head with a fire extinguisher. Fox News said exactly how Sicknick died still remains a mystery to the public, as an official cause of death has not been released. Well, I just got to stop right there and say, how is it a mystery when the mainstream media reported broadly and conclusively that he died from being hit on the head with a fire extinguisher? How interesting that about a month later, the story is being retracted. Media reports have been conflicting. Unnamed law enforcement sources initially told outlets Sicknick was bludgeoned in the head by a fire extinguisher. Bludgeoned would imply to me not that it was thrown, but that someone actually picked it up and struck him with it. While others speaking on condition of anonymity countered those claims, arguing there was no immediate evidence showing that Sicknick suffered any blunt force trauma. Well, these are two drastically different stories. First, the one says that he was bludgeoned, and then the other one says no immediate evidence showing any blunt force trauma. The story here with Fox concludes as the autopsy results remain pending. Investigators are also weighing the possibility that Sicknick could have died from exposure to a chemical irritant, such as bear mace or pepper spray. It also remains unclear whether Sicknick had any pre-existing conditions. This is so troubling because we look at all of this and we see that people are being riled up. We see that people are losing their free speech rights, that people are being condemned, they're losing their jobs because they had participation in the event on January 6th, not participation in the violence and the violation of the perimeters of the U.S. Capitol building, but simply because they were present. And I had firsthand reports from a lot of people who were there who told me that that particular incident was full of godly people for the most part who were praying, who were singing hymns, who were doing patriotic recitations and others, and that this was a very isolated situation. And as the news comes out now, very likely to be pre-planned. And of course, now everybody who was associated is being called an insurrectionist or treasonous, and it is on those premises that they are being deprived of their rights and their abilities to make a living. I wanted you to be very aware of this information because you're not going to hear it from too many other places. And I want this to be a two-part discussion because there's so much more to get into. You need to be aware that, yes, President Trump was right those years ago when he said there is fake news. The intent is to deceive and rile the American public and to undermine our fundamental liberties. And I would say, by and large, the Democrats, the globalists, and the communist Chinese have been very successful. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in a moment.
Support this podcast online at shillingshow.com.
Border BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border, as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Community-supported investigative journalism. Schilling Show Unleashed.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and we welcome to the program Patrick Wood, a leading and critical expert on sustainable development, green economy, Agenda 21, a 2030 agenda, and historic technocracy. He's a frequent radio guest on these topics nationwide, and today's topic is big tech dominance and the technocracy agenda. And Pat Wood, welcome back to the Schilling Show Unleashed. Great to have you with us this morning.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
Could you help us understand the term technocracy for our listeners who have not heard it before?
I sure can. And the best nutshell, directly from the books of early technocrats in the 1930s, it is the science of social engineering. And it's economic in nature in the sense that it seeks to control all economic activity to the exclusion of having a political system to moderate society. They believed that only science could provide the answers for people and the interactions of people in society, and that if they controlled the entire economic system, well, everything would be good. And that's where the science of social engineering came in, because they figured that they could manipulate the herd of human population to be happy little campers in the economic system that they produced for us.
So, Pat, if this originated in the 1930s, it means it's not new. So tell us how this manifested historically. How did this get rolling, and what did it look like over the years?
Well, sure. It got started at Columbia University in 1932 in earnest, even though it had been discussed in the late 20s. But a group of engineers and scientists at Columbia University got together, and they figured during the heat of the Great Depression that capitalism was dead. They hated politicians because they kind of blamed the politicians for the economic chaos that reigned back then. And so they took it upon themselves to create this new economic system from scratch. They figured, hey, we're engineers, we're scientists, we have technology on our side, we can do this. And they did, and they called it technocracy. And it was a radical economic system in the sense that it completely discarded free market economics and price-based economics, and it sought instead to have a resource-controlled economic system. And this is exactly what we see prevailing in the world today, at least it's trying to prevail.
Let's talk about the big tech companies and the amount of power they've gained through technology, because the sort of control we see today is certainly was not possible in the past. So what are the technologies that have led to this point?
I think probably you have to look all across the board of technology in general and science. And you've had great advances in the last 30, 40 years. It's accelerated geometrically, not arithmetically. The curve seems to be getting steeper every day on new discoveries. As technology and science progressed, there were certain parts of it that had great interest to those who would use it to control society. For instance, simple advances in mathematics may not be too interesting, but advances in facial recognition, on the other hand, have great value to the technocrat mind because it provides for surveillance. The big thing today with the big tech technology that's taking place is that it has allowed them to permeate society with technology that sets up a trap for control of the people. This is what has happened, for instance, with social media. It's very deep and very pervasive in society today, and it is used to control what people see and believe and think and feel. And you also see the money being accumulated. That is, the people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are the two richest men in the world today. They are practicing, if you will, technocracy to drive us into a resource-based economic system. This is all across the board. It's not just big tech, and when we think of a Twitter and a Facebook, but there's many other companies that are technology-based that are involved in this as well.
The target has been conservatives very recently, Christians, Christian biblical worldview. So has this always been the case, or has this been used also in the past or in the present against progressive, communist, liberal points of view?
No, it has been around for a long time, and it started out with that bent even back in the 1930s. The reason is the philosophical underpinnings of both technocracy and what we know as transhumanism today is scientism. Scientism is a religious proposition that was created by a French philosopher back in the early 1800s, and it proposed that science essentially was the new God. And this new God had a priesthood of scientists and engineers and technologists. And scientism has matured, if you will, as a philosophy over the years. The dangerous thing about it is that it rejects all other forms of truth and sources of truth outside of science. So if science can't prove something to these people, they reject it outright. That includes the Bible, but it also includes philosophy. It also includes, historical interpretations. If it can't be demonstrated in the test tube, so to speak, it just simply doesn't exist. So we see this bias against Christianity and a biblical worldview, as you say. We see the bias against conservatives because many conservatives happen to be Christians. And it's not that they're just after Christianity or they're just after the Bible to kill it. It's just that they have no use for it, so they automatically try to exclude it. We see so to speak, the exclusion of conservatism and think, oh, it's because you're conservative. Not really. It just happens that conservatives have most of the people who think that this is not right. If somebody on the left side of the political spectrum starts talking about some of the issues that are being censored, they will be censored as well. Unfortunately, there's just not as many of them as there are on the right side.
Let's talk about the ramp up that took place very recently, Patrick Wood. And this happened very obviously in the waning days of President Trump's tenure in Washington, D.C. So was that a coincidence or was that planned?
The propensity of a technocrat who has an orientation towards science and engineering has the ability, kind of the inherent ability to plan things, to try to execute strategies to bring things about. This is the way science works. It's difficult to put your finger on it exactly to say, well, here are the conspirators who planned it. That would get off into the weeds pretty quickly. But when you look at the pattern of things, you realize that it could not have just happened spontaneously either. And we see this kind of strategizing all throughout the modern, happenings here that we're, really distressed by the whole COVID pandemic, for instance. Was that orchestrated, or was it did it just happen spontaneously and they took advantage of it? There's a lot of evidence that says, yes, it was actually orchestrated. But could you take it to a court of law? Might be difficult. But nevertheless, here we are.
And so we have this attack right now, which is manifesting itself in shutting down free speech, in particular, attack on the First Amendment, religious rights, and so forth. People should be very alarmed by this, and yet I don't see a whole lot of people in the United States of America expressing the sort of concern that you are.
Well, I hope to change that, honestly. I agree with you. A lot of people are still asleep at the switch. They're wearing their face masks, which many call face diapers now, without any objection whatsoever. They will be more concerned as, this thing goes on and doesn't stop. And you remember initially we were just trying to flatten the curve for 14 days. That was back in early 2020. And here we are. Not only have we not flattened the curve, whatever the heck that meant in the first place, Dr. Anthony Fauci is now telling us, no, we don't need to wear one mask. We need to wear two. This is absolutely insane. It will wear thin one day on people, I'm sure. And they'll wake up and think, what the heck is going on here? Why hasn't this gone away by now? But we're stumping all over America, I'll tell you, to tell this story, because it is an egregious violation of the First Amendment, and it's just a blatant attack on the First Amendment to destroy it. And if the First Amendment is destroyed, the rest of the Constitution will topple almost immediately. And we just simply can't let that happen.
Let me ask you about the First Amendment, free speech, and particularly in regard to social media. And I've had this conversation with different people and had different takes on it, but I'd like to get yours. Are these entities obligated, because of their Section 230 protection, to allow people to speak freely, certainly within reason, but are they mandated to do that? Are they getting away with something here? Or what sort of change needs to be made so that speech is protected online as well?
I know this discussion, on one hand, you say, well, a private company can do what it wants to do. That's generally true. But what if your utility company was turned loose and told that they can do whatever they want to do? It doesn't matter what they do. They can do whatever they want to do because they're a private company. Well, I can almost guarantee you that your utility rates would go up into the stratosphere. They would begin to charge more and more and more for the electricity and natural gas that they supply to you. And they would squeeze you and bleed you dry. You say, well, is this right? Well, what happened along the way? Well, they got regulated by the government, in every state as well, to make sure that that they treated the public fairly, and they were just another provider at the time. This kind of mentality probably ought to apply to these big social media giants. However, having said that, when three giant companies gang up on a single entity like Parler and put them out of business overnight, that's not hiding behind the protection of 230. That's murder. That's just outright murder. The people who invested in Parler, their money is gone. Their investments are gone. Poof. For all the people that had data on Parler, that would be the 20 million people that use it, their data is gone. That data has value. Poof. The people that work there at Parler, who had good jobs, did honest, legal activity, etc., their jobs are gone. Poof. The companies that killed Parler did so in collusion with each other. It wasn't just, 1, 2, 3 out of the blue, random chance that they all did the same things at the same time. This was a conspiracy to kill another legal functioning company. And that is flat out wrong, Rob. Just wrong.
So, Pat, if there were two local realtors and they sat down in an office and colluded to cut their commissions in order to drive a competitor out of business, they would be in jail for at least 10 years, and it would happen very quickly if that was proven. So why have we not seen justice here, or is it just in the works right now?
I don't know that it's in the works, honestly. It may be. I have no hope that Washington is going to save us in this thing right now. They seem to be so consumed with themselves and their Green New Deal programs and every other cockeyed thing that other than taking care of the people. I don't know if they're going to do anything at all. It's going to be very difficult to come down against these companies, these technocrat companies, without help from legislators. But I have to say, states can do a tremendous amount And so can local communities as well. That is, city councils, for instance, have the power of binding ordinances that can prevent things from coming into their city or being used or being applied in their cities. And I think this local activism really is where people need to focus right now if they're going to put up any kind of a firewall against this, what I call the technocrat coup de grace.
It seems to me, Patrick Wood, that President Trump himself was a firewall just sitting in that office until about 3 weeks before the term was over, when they saw that he didn't have any more power, or at least he was perceived to be that way. And so they shut down a president of the United States. Ostensibly the most powerful man in the world was totally silenced and essentially banished. I'm assuming that that's not the last time we're going to see that sort of flagrant abuse of power. But is there anything to be done from someone in political office who cares about that?
Until they view the big tech sector and technocrats as a threat to their own existence, they probably are not going to move. I have to give kind of at least a tip of the hat or a call out to Russia's president, Vladimir Putin. Not that I like him or Russia, believe me, but I just have to give a shout out because he recently made a statement, public statement, that acknowledged that big tech is trying to take over society, to take over the activities and engineering of society. That's his job, you see. In other words, that's what Putin is good at. And he sees the big tech world and these technocrats as competing with him now. Now, that just sets up an interesting geopolitical dilemma in my mind, that there's going to be more sparks here in the future. But politicians need to understand that technocracy intends to completely wipe them out. It had no room for politicians because it felt that there was no need for them. They believed that if they controlled the economic system correctly, that there'd be no need for any political system whatsoever. So there is this natural competition between them. And, we saw this last year, I think, when Congress drug the heads of some of these big companies in for testimony, and they people like Senator Cruz just hung them out to dry, basically, in public, and chewed them out and threatened them and antitrust action and this, that, and the other. And they all just walked out. When they were all done getting tongue lashed, they walked out, basically thumbed their nose, and went on about their business. And 6 months later, they were found to be doing twice as much as they were doing before that was objectionable. So I think, just skipping track a minute, I think President Trump made a very good point when he said once, "They're not after me, they're after you." Mm-hmm. And Trump he just happened to be the figurehead for the populist movement in America. That's all he was. He wasn't a saint per se, right? He's just a guy that the populist movement latched onto and put into office. So just because of that, he was a figurehead. And the one thing that scares the technocrat world to death is the populist movement. This is true not only in our country, it's true in Europe and Germany right now, and France are having protests, and Great Britain they're having protests. The populists are rising up. These technocrats are scared to death of the populist movement because they are backed by the people. And their positions and their whole narrative is not backed by the people. And they have no other means of defense against the populist movement other than to just nullify it and just, disappear it, so to speak.
So speaking of populism, there's been a new breed of populism on display over the past week or so in the news media with populism in trading. And we've seen GameStop and also silver run-ups. People here have got to be tweaking the globalists in a big way. They're mad and fighting back, aren't they?
Yes, they are. There's a lot of tension and a lot of angst. It's like a spring, that's really just kind of wound up tight and compressed. It's just ready to release its energy at any time. And I think that's one thing we've seen right now is they've gone after the hedge funds and gave them fits. Did they destroy them? Not necessarily, but it made national news, and it sure did make a point.
There's another sort of problem banning that's going on right now, and you've referenced this many times before, Pat Wood. It has to do with financial access, and there are several areas here. The first one I want to start with is PayPal and places like GoFundMe that have all of a sudden decided they want to censor causes that they disagree with.
Well, that's exactly right. This indicates the depth of permeation, if you will, of the technocrat mindset. It's not just the Twitters and the Facebooks, but it goes down into all these other companies that are using technology to control people. So we see companies, secondary companies in the public view, like the PayPals and the Visas and the Stripes. Then you also see service providers like ISPs and MailChimp, the giant mailing service, that censor people. And these are not traditionally in the public eye as being quote unquote a big tech company, but they are technology based, and they think the same way. They're in the same philosophical channel as the rest of these people are. And so this goes very deep. Parler went to find another data service that would, the ISP that would serve their data and their programs. They were met with a brick wall. The other companies they went to, like Amazon, of course, Amazon kind of owns that space right now for data storage and for cloud processing. But there are many other companies that provide those services as well. Parler went out and said, we'll just find somebody else and host our system over there. They didn't find anybody because they all shut the door in their face. Wow. Were these other companies just honoring somehow what Amazon did? Sounds to me like it.
There's also been an executive order that was placed by the president on his way out the door, and I don't think it got a lot of publicity, but I certainly took note of it. And it was something to the effect of banning these entities, these financial entities, for financial viewpoint discrimination. I'd imagine you are aware of that, and if so, is that going to last? Is that going to have any impact?
I think that generally anything that Trump did is going to be nullified by Biden at this point. And if there's anything good that he did during the last 4 years, it's going to be purposely overridden by Biden. And here's why I say that. Biden's entire entourage are 100% sold out to the World Economic Forum's idea of a great reset. This is technocracy. And even though Biden himself is not a technocrat, he's a useful idiot, in my opinion. He's not a scientist, he's not an engineer, but he's bowing to them. And his whole agenda right now is the same agenda that the world elite have for us and for the world, and that is to take over the world. This is a global program right now, not just limited to America, not limited to Democrats, Republicans, or left, right. It's not Antifa, it's not Black Lives Matter, it's not the Proud Boys. This is a global program to capture the world. And Biden is 100% sold out to that. Trump was not. He was at least maybe a mixed bag in some cases, but Trump was not for many of those things. So anything good that Trump did will be overridden or ignored by the Biden administration.
And so do we have a need for a parallel network of technology that would not be subject to this? Is that even possible?
Well, I think Parler was a good example of something that was different. They were dedicated to freedom of speech and to the First Amendment. We saw what it got them. They got them killed in the end, and they may come back. There's no, we may well see Parler come back. But there are other tech companies that are moving against this big giant, some people call it the giant vampire squid of technology. There are other companies like Parler that are coming up offering an alternative to people. Citizens need to take advantage of those companies and try to move away and isolate these offending companies and go over to these other companies and give your business to them. Parler, at the time of its demise, I believe, had 20 million users. That's a lot of users. Well, it's not so much compared to like Facebook. It has in the billions, but still, 20 million users is a lot of users. And you have video platforms now that are coming out that are an alternative to YouTube, and there's search engine alternatives now as well. These will mature, I expect. My caution to them would be watch your back, because Parler, as an example, any one of them could end up the same way if they're not careful.
Patrick Wood, if people would like to get more information on your work, if they'd like to join up with you in resisting all of this technocracy, what's the best way for them to do so?
I would encourage everybody to go to citizensforfreespeech.org and get on board with us to preserve and defend the First Amendment in America. This is the existential issue, I believe, of our day. And if we do not preserve the First Amendment and free speech, America has no way to return to its former glory.
Pat Wood, you're doing very important work. We appreciate it a lot, and I thank you so much for joining us here today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
My pleasure, anytime.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.